We didn't predict this at the start of the week. John Hynes returns to Smashville tonight as the Minnesota Wild head coach. Preview of the game today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making the Locked On Predators podcast your first listen of the day. Every single day, we are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, want to start out with a special shout out to our loyal Locked On Pred heads out there, the everydayers who tune into every single show. We love you guys, and we appreciate the support you give us week in, week out. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer at Penalty Box Radio, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at the Hockey News.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Nashville Predators are at Bridgestone Arena tonight, taking on the Minnesota Wild. It is a big Central Division rivalry. Predators looking to extend their win streak to 7 games. So a lot of big storylines in this one, and all trumped by the guy who is now behind the Minnesota Wild bench, John Hynes, the brand new head coach of the Wild, back in Smashville for the first time since getting let go this past summer. This is going to be a doozy tonight, Ann.
Like, they couldn't have waited till Friday to hire him. They couldn't have just waited till Friday because like you said, there's so many storylines here. Just to begin with, you got Nashville on this 6-game win streak after a 4-game losing streak. You have a Central Division rival coming in. Minnesota and Nashville are very much like dating in a small Christian school. Everybody knows everybody. Players have been on both teams. So there's just tons of, storylines already built into this. And then Minnesota announces that they've named their next head coach. And friends, it's John Hynes. And I think this feels even more different than had they said it's Peter Laviolette. It's Barry Trotz, who has stepped down from being the general manager in Nashville and become the head coach of Minnesota. Like, you could not write this. You couldn't have written this up in a way that is more interesting and also, friends, let's be honest, a little more terrifying for the Nashville Predators.
Yeah. I think you and I said this right before we started recording, where it's like, if tonight is the night where the Nashville Predators big winning streak ends, we might just take this morning off tomorrow.
Anybody who owns any sort of a tool store or farming store, just move the pitchforks closer to the front of the store. You will sell out. Yeah, this is a game that's got a lot of big feels. I don't think there's been quite enough time. I don't know, to be honest, how much time it would take for elements of this fan base to feel like they would maybe welcome John Hynes back a little better than I think he'll get welcomed back tonight. So big feels for tonight's game off the ice, let alone what's going to happen on the ice. It's like I feel like Homer Simpson, who just wants to shrink back into the shrubbery in that meme. I don't know if I want to be here to watch this.
Yeah. There's a lot of things to get to today. We're going to talk about the ups and downs of John Hynes' tenure in Nashville, because as we mentioned before, Ann, there are some good things that
Sure.
came out of it, and he did do some things well. We'll also talk about keys to victory against the Wild tonight, but let's just start out with the John Hynes part of it first. Back in Bridgestone tonight, what reception does he get? It can't be good, right?
I hope that it is. This is one of those cases where if you break up with somebody and you end up dating a supermodel, when you run into the average person, you be nice to them. You know what I'm saying? Have some grace. Don't think that's going to happen, though. Don't think there's been enough time. I think just his tenure was divisive enough among the fan base. I think frustration with the team was kind of at a high for the last little while. I think frustration kind of culminated under John Hynes. So I don't expect them to cheer when they announce the lineup. I do believe there will be, with gusto, said he sucks too. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think that I am. I don't know that it's going to be a warm welcome, but what do you expect when with this?
It's tough because Peter Laviolette, there's a lot of people that wanted him gone too. A lot of people,
Mhm.
for over a year were kind of saying, okay, it's time for Lavi to go, time for Lavi to go. But got a pretty warm reaction when he came back to Bridgestone Arena. So, there's certainly a chance of some appreciation there. But Peter Laviolette also led the Nashville Predators to a Stanley Cup final appearance.
Right.
And John Hynes didn't. And I think it's different because there really wasn't that much excitement when John Hynes came in to begin with, whether that was right or wrong.
Mhm.
It's
Don't you think the way he was brought in sort of set it up for a little bit of frustration from the get-go for the fan base? Like, I think if John Hynes had been brought in as an interim, even
yeah,
just as an interim, and even if the Predators would have kept him on after that, I think it maybe would have felt different to the fan base. Maybe I'm
yeah.
wrong, but I think people didn't like it from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I think a lot of people Laviolette let go, and everybody was like, "Oh, let's get an outside the box hire, and we're gonna, hey, maybe Carl Taylor is the guy. Maybe we're
Mhm.
gonna see him come up and be the interim.
Yeah.
Maybe we're gonna see them, go kind of outside the league and hire, this, a hot shot from the European leagues or some like an up and coming person, and then just within." I think it was really 8 hours when the
Right.
Laviolette news broke that it was like, oh, by the way, here's the guy from New Jersey who just got fired last year
Yes.
after one playoff appearance in 5 years. I think a lot of people were like, well, wait a minute, this is anticlimactic.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem fun. And I think Hines was under a microscope from that point forward.
Mhm.
And I also think that this is something we're going to talk about in 1 second when we get to our pros and cons. But I also think the roster was, for most of his tenure,
Mhm.
kind of underachieving. And I
Right.
think he sort of took the brunt of that. We will debate about how much brunt he should take of that.
Yeah.
But I think there's just a lot of people associate the Hines era with big expectations followed by poor results and questionable sort of decisions in terms of handling players in the middle of that. And I think leading up to that, John Hynes probably has not looked too fondly amidst the fan base. So I just I have a bad feeling that the reaction is not going to
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah, it's gonna be awkward. It's I think it is. I do think that it is. I hope that it's not. I hope that fans can just, "Hey, you were here. Thank you." And move on and play the game.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll see.
yeah. As we mentioned, there are some pros and cons of the tenure of John Hynes in
Mhm.
Nashville. Some good, some bad. We're going to talk about the highs and lows of that in just 1 second. Also, going to talk about the key to a win against the Minnesota Wild tonight. They just broke a 7-game losing streak, so it is going to be interesting to see how Nashville responds. All that coming up here shortly, but first want to mention today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to sporting events, if you're listening to this and have gone to Nashville Predators games, it can kind of be a crapshoot, folks. Number one, you're not really sure where your seats are. unless you've been to that building. Number two, those ticketing apps are just absolute chaos with all the added fees. You can buy 2 tickets for $25 and wind up paying a $300 bill. This is where Game Time comes in. Game Time is the ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And the all-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without all of the hidden fees. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, even an hour sometimes after it starts. So it's the place to find last-minute deals. They also have exclusive flash deals and sponsor deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and much, much more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always have the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Ann, we are talking about the John Hynes tenure in Nashville. Some high, some low, mostly low. I guess let's start with this. What do you remember as a positive thing from John Hynes' tenure?
You have to look at some of the things that happened under head coach John Hynes. And here is kind of my belief as we look at pros and cons. I don't think you can blame a coach for everything that went wrong with the team and also not give credit to a coach for some of the things that went right for a team. I think figuring out the nuance of how much is credited to coaching and how much should be taken away from coaching, I think that's very nuanced. But I will say one of the positives that you have to look at is that under John Hynes, you had some players have career best seasons. You know, you had Matt Duchene and Philip Forsberg set a single season, they battled for the single season goal scoring record under John Hynes. Matt Duchene ultimately, beat that. And Philip Forsberg may try to beat that this year with head coach Andrew Brunette, the way he's playing right now. But you have players like Matt Duchene and Philip Forsberg really have career seasons. You had UC Saros, who was a Vezina finalist in 21-22. You had Roman Josi set the franchise record for assists in 21-22, score 97 points. So you did have players perform their best under head coach John Hynes. Now, how do you credit, how you decide how much of that credit goes to coaching and how much goes to, players and in that, that's a very nuanced, I think that's a nuanced conversation. But I do think you have to give John Hynes credit for the fact that under his coaching, you had some star players have their best years.
Yeah. And I do think he deserves credit, especially because you heard Matt Duchene sort of in the midst of that career season, talking. It's like, look, me and John Hynes sat down together in this offseason and kind of talked about my game, and we've been working on it together. And he kind of, changed my perspective, and he talked about that, giving him a lot of confidence and sort of a new sort of look at his game. And that's what spurred that season. And Taylor Hall said the same thing the year that he won the MVP, was that, that just sort of like 90-point season that came out of nowhere. And the New Jersey Devils got into the playoffs, despite being kind of a hodgepodge of a team. And Taylor Hall said, look, John Hynes did a lot of this, like this was kind of a big reason why, was just because, his coaching and everything like that. So, give credit to there. I'll also give credit, and for giving the Nashville Predators an identity at a time where they didn't really have one. Because let's go back to the end of the Laviolette era. There's all these, after the Stanley Cup Finals, they decided to go skill, which is fine because that's the game that, that the NHL is headed in.
Right.
But then you kind of just had, an extensive depth chart of players that weren't really sure where they fit.
True.
And I mean, we had Kyle Turris as a fourth line center for, a wild part of, that last Laviolette season. You had, big trades like, Wayne Simmons coming over and Brian Boyle, and neither one of them were really sure, like, okay, what's the role here? It just kind of seemed like, okay, we're just going to put like our best depth players on a depth chart and see how everything shakes out.
Right.
John Hynes, I think, kind of took that and said, okay, no. Here is the philosophy of which we're going to play. Here's how, if you're on the first line, this is how you're going to play. If you're on the second line, this is how you're going to play. Third and fourth lines, first, second D pairs, blah, 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 blah. And I think that kind of got the Nashville Predators going a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going to argue that maybe his style of play wasn't something that, the Nashville Predators should have invested in. This sort of like grind it out, physical, hard-nosed team. But it's better than not really having a clear direction. And the Nashville Predators didn't have a clear direction. And again, we talk about John Hynes in last year and the year before kind of, sort of, I guess, underachieving with a pretty good Nashville Predators roster. I also think you have to get credit for that, COVID late start season in 2021, leading a also sort of rebuilding in transition Nashville Predators roster to the postseason.
Right.
So I do think that there has to be some credit there.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think there was a little bit of chaos at the end of the Peter Laviolette era, and whether you feel like it worked really well or it didn't, John Hynes did give players a better sense of clearly what he wanted from them, and I do think that had to help. I also think you do have to give John Hynes a little bit of credit for what happened at the end of last season, when you had all of these injuries. Of course, then you had the trade deadline where everybody and their brother was shipped out, and you were left with kind of this bare bones veteran team, throwing in players like Evangelista and Tomasino and, Spencer Stasny for 8 games, and Tommy Novak came up, and he really took a situation where you're coaching a very different team all of a sudden. You're not coaching veterans necessarily like you were anymore. The veterans like Duchesne and Johansson, they're out. Forsberg was out. Roman Josi was out. You're coaching a very different looking roster like that, and he helped that team be really competitive and really fun to watch. So I do think he deserves some credit too for what the Nashville Predators were able to do at the end of last season. That was probably some of the most fun hockey for the fan base I think that they had seen in years. So I do think you got to give him credit for being able to pivot real hard in the middle of the season and create something out of that.
Yeah. I think you're probably right in that. Negatives.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the roster decisions.
Yes.
So the Nashville Predators have an opportunity to get some younger players on the roster, have them in, I guess, some critical moments. This is where it seems like the downfall of John Hynes came from, where it was almost like the actor that's typecasted, where it's like, we are looking for one specific role here. And if you don't fit, you might be better than 3 other players, but if you don't fit that one role we're looking for, we don't really have a place for you.
Yeah.
We know there's an ET word I won't mention to you, Anne, but
you can say it. We can have a conversation.
Ellie Tolvanen was kind of the poster child for this.
Yeah.
And, especially hearing, David Poyle's comments, not only about, kind of what happened with him, but, kind of why he started thriving in Seattle. And it's like, you kind of wonder, it's like, okay, clearly what the Predators weren't doing was working. So why doesn't John Hynes try something different?
Right.
Why doesn't he sort of throw out the line strategy and do, something more creative to get, people like Ellie Tolvanen time and opportunities that he deserves some time, like power play. Like you talk about, oh, well, they were, he needed some second, power play time and he wasn't getting a lot of it. Then why don't you just give him more? or he needs to be in scoring situations and the lineup doesn't really call for it. Why don't you change the lineup to do that?
Right.
It was, I guess the word to use was hard-headed, maybe a little bit rigid,
inflexible.
Yeah. But I would say that is maybe the biggest, I think, downfall of John Hynes that encompasses all other issues, is just sort of the rigidness.
Yeah. And I feel like the situation with Ellie Tolvanen is really where that sort of became for people this is not going to work. Ellie Tolvanen, I think in a lot of ways, that whole situation was sort of a nail in the coffin, right or wrong, because let's be real, the only person who gets to share the narrative from that dynamic is Ellie Tolvanen. John Hynes is not going to speak out about what that situation was like. So yeah, I think, a little bit of flexibility might have bought him a lot more goodwill. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. A little bit more on this conversation coming up. And plus, how do the Predators beat the Minnesota Wild? Because it's a team bad in the standings, but who has a win under their belt. They're going to come in motivated, looking for a win tonight. So we'll get into that in just 1 second.
First, want to let you know this episode's brought to you by our great friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy in sports. And it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle to level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, Ann. Right before we took a quick break, we were talking about, the John Hynes kind of lineup decision tenures. And yeah, like that seemed to be the all-encompassing thing that I think most people were concerned about. And even though it's just one thing, it seems like it spearheaded a lot of other issues in Nashville, like young prospects not getting, a lot of time. Certain players coming in and sort of being put in roles that they're not familiar with, or opportunities to grow. The handling of, players like Cody Glass and Phil Tomasino, where it's like, okay, well, it's almost like the stepmom or the kidnapper from Tangled who didn't want Rapunzel to go see the light of day and just told her about all the scary things. It's like, no. See, you turned the puck over and, oh, look out there. It's scary Connor McDavid. You're going to be safe here on the bench or in the press box while this is going on.
Yeah.
That seemed to just, I think, frustrate a lot of people, whether you agree it's the right call or not. It just seemed like it sort of led to a myriad of problems.
I think a lot of the perception was framed by expectations under John Hynes, because the expectations under John Hynes are very different, or were very different than what they are under Andrew Brunette. You can healthy scratch Phil Tomasino, and not that people like it under Andrew Brunette, but you can healthy scratch Phil Tomasino because you know that this team is in a reset. You know that they're committed. They're committed to developing young talent. It may take longer than people like. Under John Hynes, the expectation was this is a team that should contend for a cup. And the exact same decisions look different based on the expectations under which the coach made those decisions. It was poor roster management under John Hynes. It's player development under Andrew Brunette. Right or wrong, the expectations really framed how people viewed a lot of the decisions. You talked about the lineup changes. Those were very frustrating to fans under John Hynes. Under Andrew Brunette, it's we're trying to develop these players a little bit slower. We're trying to find the right chemistry. We're trying to find the right combinations long term. So I do think that expectations and the season in which in the franchise John Hynes came in really also shaped perception about his performance here.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit unfair to put a lot of the blame on him when it was also, David Poyle telling me, it's like, hey, this is the window, this is the roster you have.
Right.
So he's
Make it
going to be
happen.
less patient
Yeah.
with certain players in their development. But yeah, it wound up being the wrong call. So let's talk about the game tonight, and Nashville
Yeah.
Predators taking on the Minnesota Wild. John Hynes, this is his second game behind the bench. He won his first. Of course, a lot of turmoil happening with the Minnesota Wild. Speaking of a team that hasn't met expectations this season, how do you see this one going, and what is a key for you for the Predators to bump that win streak up to 7 games?
I think the Predators really have to focus on themselves and not let any of this around this situation with Minnesota have any impact inside of the locker room, no matter how individual players may feel or any of that. I really think the Nashville Predators have to be very internally focused because they're on the right track. And you don't want to get sidetracked by some sort of storyline that doesn't have anything to do with performance on the ice. So for me, I really think the players have to dial in and focus on their game because they are doing a lot of the right things. And if they can kind of stay out of the mud of this extra storyline with John Hynes, I think that they'll have some success. You're looking at a Minnesota team, which is really surprising to me because their roster is not terrible.
Yeah.
But they're 6-10-4. They just have not been able to get it going. And some of their best players are underperforming. If Nashville's, players like Philip Forsberg, if you can get some more depth scoring from players like Yakov Trenin and the McCarron Tomasino Smith line, I think the Predators can manage this game. They just have to stay out of the mud.
Yeah. This was, to me, you look at the top of that Minnesota Wild lineup struggling, albeit, Matt Zuccarello, who's having a very good year.
Right.
It kind of lines up to saying it's like, okay, this is a game in which that top line for Nashville can take over. Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, Gustav Nyquist, those guys, I think, have an opportunity to really get going. And the key for me, Ann, is just get shots on net.
Come on.
Because you look at the Minnesota Wild goaltending this season, and this is a big storyline for them because both Marc-Andre Fleury and Philip Gustafsson played very well last year, were a big reason why the Wild has so much success. Both of them struggling, this year so far. So, there's some shakiness in goal for the Minnesota Wild. So if you're the Nashville Predators, you're at home, you're at Bridgestone Arena. The fans really want this win for,
want this.
maybe some things other than just the standings reasons.
Yeah.
If you're the Nashville Predators, this is your opportunity to, I think, pepper, whoever's in goal for the Wild with a lot of shots, make them make saves.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think the more you can put the pucks on the net, you're gonna get some of those greasy goals, which are fine. You know what? Count just the same as the pretty ones. So I agree with you. I think pucks on net. I do think goaltending is something to pressure when it comes to the Minnesota Wild. Also, contain players like Kaprizov. He is not having his best season. He's only got 6 goals, 20 games in this time last season. He had twice that number of goals, but don't give him an opportunity to kind of open up that game. The Minnesota Wild have a springboard now with a new coach. Control that energy with your play. Good passes, quick transitions. Just the Predators know what they need to do. They just need to not get caught in any of the mud that surrounds this game. So hopefully the Predators can get a win. This will be a 7-game win streak. It'd be huge for the Nashville Predators. And this is a winnable game. So please, 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 for the love of God and the podcast tomorrow. We need you to win.
Yes. I will be taking a day off.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
We'll still be here.
We'll
breaking
still
down.
be here, but it will be painful, y'all.
Yeah, we'll stay tuned tomorrow for a one word to describe the game, plus all of the goodies that came out of that win or loss. And where can people find your work?
You can find my work online at InsideThePreds.com. You can find me on social media at ANK_Mama on Ice.
You can find me at penaltyboxradio.com. Follow me on Twitter, X, whatever, at _NS Morgan. That's going to do it for us on today's Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.